In 1927, Ma Rainey, the bombastic mother of blues, and her band's rowdy live shows were a hot ticket in Georgia. Her provocative lyrics became the soundtrack to Black Southern life and the racist reality of the Jim Crow South. Now here's a song you may already know. Racial injustice decreed by law in the South through separate drinking fountains, colored washrooms, segregated schools, and senseless violence. The tune to the North promised something different. It called Black people to seek refuge and better opportunities in cities in the North and West. This mass exodus would become known as the Great Migration, in which over 6 million African Americans fled the South for cities like New York, Detroit, and Chicago between the years 1915 and 1970. But it didn't deliver on the utopia it promised. As Black people, including Ma and her band, left the South searching for freedom and an identity of their own, they found more struggle, more segregation, more inequality. Through Ma's story, let's take a deeper look at the Great Migration's impact on American culture. In Wilson's play, Ma Rainey may seem larger than life, but she was very much a real person. She was born Gertrude Pridgett in Columbus, Georgia on April 26, 1886. At least that's how Ma used to tell it. Other accounts list her birthplace as Alabama in 1882. Maybe Ma was just trying to seem younger, as one does. Or maybe we don't have a definitive answer about her birth date, because white authorities in America were notoriously bad at tracking Black births. The region Ma was born into was no place for anyone Black, let alone a child. Even after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, whites in the South created a caste system that thrived on injustice, severe wage inequality, and mob violence that was slightly more humane than slavery, so still completely inhumane. Living in the South, aka the Black Belt of America, where 90% of African Americans called home, was becoming increasingly unsustainable and deadly. For 7 decades, a Black person was lynched more than once a week in the South, with few repercussions. By 1915, Black Americans, thinkers, artists, activists, became refugees seeking asylum from racial terror in their own country and started leaving the South in droves with the encouragement of the Chicago Defender, the era's leading African-American newspaper. Through persuasive headlines, the paper pushed the North as a real opportunity for Blacks to live in freedom. The paper regularly ran features exposing anti-Black violence in the South, side by side with job postings in Chicago. More work, less lynching, was a pretty convincing sales pitch. Thanks to the Defender's PR campaign and high demand for factory workers in the North due to World War I, Southern Blacks left en masse. But they were still a critical pillar for white Southern economies because Black people were significantly and systemically underpaid. Black teachers, for instance, might make $27 a month to a white teacher's $100 for 5 times the students. So, white people tried anything and everything to stop their cheap labor from fleeing, starting with an exorbitant tax on anyone trying to recruit Black workers. Usually, it was white labor agents sent by Northern businessmen. They also went after the migrants themselves, who traveled by boat, bus, and primarily by train. As Black people sought opportunity in the face of oppression, white people literally tried to derail the Great Migration. The first part of their plan was simple: restrict space on trains. It was done by mandating that all African Americans travel in one designated car, the Jim Crow car. Second, there was further humiliation: separate waiting rooms and washrooms at bus and train stations. And, as always, Black people had to deal with intimidation via law enforcement. Goons would post up at ticket counters to try to block access to booths, and they arrested Blacks on made-up grounds like vagrancy or for simply buying a ticket. There's a scene in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom where band member Cutler tells a story about a reverend trying to make his way from Tallahassee to Atlanta. His bandmate Levy interrupts to rattle off the train schedule by heart.
Ain't but one train come out of Tallahassee headed north to Atlanta, and it don't stop at Sigsbee. The only train that stops at Sigsbee is the Santa Fe, and you got to transfer at Moultrie to get it.
No spoilers, but their story proves that racism was waiting for Black Southerners, no matter what stop they got off at. Still, for many, those trains were their only hope for a better life. Is it any wonder that so many turned to the blues? Despite the hurdles, Ma Rainey made the journey north. She did it for that fateful recording session in Chicago the play is based on, and she also spent most of her adult life in Chi-Town. Ma was revolutionary because she brought a new sound to the North during the Great Migration. She was the first artist to combine vaudeville with an authentic Black Southern aesthetic. Therefore, in many ways, Ma was the Northern dream realized. Her blunt, between-songs banter during shows and her Southern folk-style storytelling were a hit with Black and white audiences. She was a Black woman who managed to cross over without sacrificing her Blackness or her sexuality. She was proudly queer, writing explicitly about her attraction to women. The characters in her songs were feminist, vengeful, and powerful, traits Southern women possessed, of course, but they weren't able to express. So, the fact that Ma was doing it and making money was downright heroic. Between 1923 and 1928, the height of the first wave of the migration, songs that were for and by Black people were called race records, and they were big business. As Ma gained mass appeal, record labels in the North were clamoring for more Black music like hers from the South. Ma Rainey's mentee, rival, and rumored lover, Bessie Smith, Empress of the Blues, was also an import of the Great Migration. She was born in Tennessee but moved to Philadelphia. While she would eventually surpass Ma in popularity, it's believed that Bessie wouldn't have sounded the way she did without Ma's influence. The Great Migration spawned an unprecedented artistic movement in the Black community, all centered in the migrant settlement of Harlem. This is the Harlem Renaissance. Artists like Langston Hughes, Duke Ellington, Zora Neale Hurston, and Claude McKay birthed a new Black identity in the North by centering African American culture in their work. They reclaimed and redefined what it meant to be Black in America through their art. The allure of the North stayed strong, sparking a second wave of the migration that lasted from World War II until the 1970s. By the 70s, 5 million more Black people would make the journey, officially making it the largest migration in American history. But cracks developed in the glittering facade, the hope of the Great Migration. There was the dismal economy left over from the Great Depression, but more alarming were the signs of segregation and degradation that were supposed to have been left in the South. The challenges Blacks would face in the North, racism, subjugation, manifested in which jobs they could get and where they could live. For example, in the 1940s, half of Chicago was off limits to African Americans. They were pushed into segregated areas like the South Side of Chicago and also Harlem in New York, where they still weren't able to buy property because of a racist practice known as redlining. Neighborhoods that were predominantly Black were flagged as hazardous, and loans for the area were essentially non-existent. The Great Migration is responsible for the emergence of Black ghettos in northern cities. And the effect of the oppression these communities faced is still being felt today. Just look at this map outlining upward mobility for Blacks in America. Places with the highest numbers of Black people are still struggling to catch up to a system that was rigged against them. The lasting negative impacts of the Great Migration can't be understated, but the emergence of these ghetto communities alongside the continued violent discrimination against Black Americans also gave way to something else, an iconic uprising. In the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement carved out a new Black identity and pushed against the country's white supremacist systems. During the movement, a bold and defiant Black voice emerged, inspired by the artists of the Harlem Renaissance, who were emboldened by the example set by Ma Rainey. Many poets of that era cite her as an inspiration. And later, in the 90s, while Black suburban prosperity seemed to suggest the promise of the Great Migration realized, many of the migrant-settled areas roiled in riots and resistance. Newark, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, Minnesota. Every major American city has a riot that defined a generation. And at every one, Black people who tried to leave brutality behind in the South pled for their humanity in the form of protest. Over the past decade, many Black Americans have chosen to return to the South their grandparents fled in search of another promised land. This reverse migration is sometimes referred to as Black Flight. Think of it as a reclamation. Now, more than half of Black Americans who live in metropolitan areas call the suburbs home. In Chicago, over 200,000 African Americans left the city in the last 2 decades. Again, a new group of idealistic Black artists, thinkers, dreamers are packing their bags in hopes of a better future. Black Americans continue to hope in spite of hate, celebrate joy in the face of pain, and live in a country that refuses to love them back. That's a song America can't stop singing.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the Netflix Film Club channel to get our latest exclusive videos. Plus, hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.